Welcome to Testimony Mountain. It is my joy and delight to have Joe Getzinger with us again. If you didn't hear our previous podcast, I hope you'll go back and listen to it. But do you want to just take a minute, Joe, and share a little bit about you for any new viewers?
Sure. I've been in the field of mental health, helping trauma survivors for approximately 40 years now, which is certainly dating me, but oh well. um, yeah, I've had quite a long time, probably more like 35 years, where I've really concentrated on working with trauma survivors. And I started out as a licensed clinical social worker. And I did that for about 15 years after kind of discovering, once I started really specializing in treating trauma survivors, it felt like, this is just a little drop in the bucket compared to what people really need. An hour a week, is just not enough to make an impact on the kind of life experiences they've had. They really need, I believe, a community to come around them to help model what is healthy in life and also support them through the traumatic experiences they have endured or are continuing to, experience kind of the fallout from all of that. Their lives are very disrupted from that kind of trauma background. So, um, after about 15 years of trying to do it that way, my colleague and I decided to really just not even um, renew our licenses when we came to Michigan. We moved from Indiana, where we were located, and we started to do full-time ministry. So now I would be considered a prayer minister as I work with people. And in that time, after about 15 years, we decided to do a community approach to help survivors. And we also had residential care in that time. We did that for about 20 years. So that's pretty much my background, other than I would just also share that in that time when we were doing the community approach, we met Dr. Jim Wilder, and we started doing Thrive conferences at that time. We were right in the beginning of that when he was first sharing his material. And he learned his material from going to a conference with, I think, mainly Daniel Siegel, Dr. Daniel Siegel, MD, who is a neuroscientist and learned about brain science. And Dr. Wilder basically compiled this material and made it easy to understand in layman's terms, which really helped me because I'm not a brain scientist. Where my specialty comes in is, how do I apply this within helping survivors within the session, the prayer ministry session. Um, and so what I hope to do is share a little bit about that today with all of you and go into a little bit more detail of that model. Not a lot, because we don't have that much time to go into it, but I'm going to try to hit the important areas of that so that people get an idea of what it is that we're going to be doing in the conference that's coming up soon.
That is wonderful. And that is part of the purpose of this podcast today is Joe and I want to share with you some of the things that we'll be bringing out at the retreat and encourage those of you who are interested to sign up. It's coming up really quickly. The dates are March 13 to 16 in the Austin, Texas area. There is a Zoom option also available. But I think as you share, Joe, hopefully people will understand that being in person is really beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just turn it over to you to share kind of what's on your heart and what God is leading you to share.
All right. Yeah. So a little bit more about the Thrive model. It's we came up with, well, Jim came up with that name. I say we because we were in the beginning of it. Feels like we, but he came up with that basically to say that there are areas, elements that we all need as we're growing up developmentally to actually thrive in life. And those 5 elements are belonging, receiving and giving, recovering from trauma, maturity, and coherent identity. So when we first begin in life, we're going to be paying attention as we come home from the hospital as a newborn. We're going to be paying attention to how we are attended to. And this would be the belonging level. Do we belong to anyone? Do we sense that? When our caregivers attend to us, do we feel like we're the apple of their eye? Or, is there kind of a vacant stare back to us? What's the environment like? And this very, very important element in our growth, healthy growth and development, if we have healthy attachments, forms the basis of how we will attach to others and bond throughout our entire life. And it becomes a real solid building block if it's solid. Yeah. So that would be the first one that we need. And that creates that foundation for everything else that our brain needs to develop in a healthy way. And so if our relationships are solid and we have what is called a secure attachment that forms, then we're going to be open in life to experiences, to people. And so that would be the next one, the receiving and giving level. So are we open to receive? Are we open to give in life? That would be because we have healthy attachments if we are open. And if we aren't, we're going to form fear around those areas. And so you may know people that are able to give and not receive. And you may know people that are just able to receive and not give. They don't trust themselves to give, or they don't trust others to be able to give them what they need. And then there are those who aren't able to do either one, either give or receive. And they're really in trouble because we need life experiences. We need to be open in order to learn, to grow, to have meaningful experiences in life. So that's level 2, or the second element that we need. The third one is recovering from trauma. And what do we mean by recovering from trauma? There are 6 universal distressing emotions that all of us need to learn how to recover from. Basically, the theorists and the literature agrees that there are those 6. And they're wonderful feelings, not fear, anger, disgust, shame, sadness, and hopeless despair. Most people struggle the most with shame and hopeless despair. They're very difficult emotions to recover from. And in a healthy family, we learn that. We learn how to do that just by watching our parents recover from all those feelings, because life events are going to be full of a lot of those emotions from time to time. And so we learn and watch from our parents that are modeling, this is how you recover from these feelings. Okay, so if you don't have parents that are able to do that for you, it's going to be painful. So the fourth one that is needed in healthy growth and development is maturity. And that is something that we go through all of our childhood. We have many, many options and opportunities to decide what choice we're going to make here that will be satisfactory. For instance, if you're on the playground and you're experiencing peer pressure to do something that's not good, and you decide to do it, and then you find out, well, I got into big trouble with the teacher and now the principal and then my parents, and it's not worth the consequences. And so as you learn how to do things with satisfactory choices, both in the meantime and the long term, that's called maturity. And of course, again, these building blocks prepare you for each thing. And then finally, the last element that we need is coherent identity. So that basically is a fancy way of saying, I know who I am. I know what it's like me to do and how to act in distress. And I can do it consistently because I know who I am. We probably all can relate to knowing somebody who maybe was raised in a very moral Christian home. And yet, once they reach 18 and they go out into the big world, they succumb to the pressures of the world. And they really lose their sense of their values and heart and act out. And so that's an example of that. Okay, so that's the 5 elements that we need for healthy growth and development. And we're going to be taking a look at the conference time of what it's like when we don't get those, because we're dealing with a lot of people who are interested in how to recover from complex trauma. Yeah. And so we're going to look at brain science and how our brains are impacted by trauma. And interestingly enough, every one of the areas that the brain's control center can feel pain corresponds to each one of these elements that we need to thrive. So if we don't get those elements attended to and developed well, then we're going to experience pain in the brain in 5 distinctly different ways in the brain, which is pretty interesting as you look at this. So what does pain look like at the belonging? At the belonging level, and again, that's, does anybody really care about me? Am I the apple of anybody's eye? Do I belong anywhere? If you don't feel that, it's going to make life feel like it's very, very painful. Life and relationships are painful. Someone may come in with that kind of a problem and have a ton of failed relationships, have a lot of chronic depression. The pain at each one of these regions, these 5 regions, are going to be very similar in the intensity, except for this one. This one feels like you're going to die if you don't get what you need. Very, very painful. It also requires the greatest amount of ability or skill on the part of the one who's helping. You need to be consistent. You need to be fearless. You need to be able to stick in there with someone, even when they relate to you like you could be an abuser. Because oftentimes, as I said before, this establishes the way you relate throughout life until that's healed. And it takes a great deal of work to heal and time. It forms what are called insecure attachments. And there are different attachment styles that we'll take a look at in the conference and go over those and help attendees identify what style do I have. So there are 4 styles, and the first one is secure, as we described, and what you need growing up. And if you don't get that, there are 3 styles that are insecure. Okay. So that's at the belonging level, what the pain looks like, and it's pretty awful.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, did you have any questions at this point? Am I clear? And
No, this is really, really good. And I think this is part of, the typical model that's out there for healing and deliverance and type of things is, there's some good that takes place in healing, but this other side of maturity, which you'll get into a little bit more, is so key because we miss the relational skills when we had that trauma in the beginning. And to me, this is the whole package that is so needed. And so I'm so excited about this. We've
right.
been, talking about this in our transformation groups and learning gradually, but this is so key. So continue. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So pain at the receiving and giving level looks like fearful reality. And this is, well, as I described, those who are really in trouble can't either do either one, receive or give. And so, can you imagine if you're not open to receiving and giving, how are you going to learn? How are you going to grow? How are you going to interact?
Mhm.
And it's very debilitating, this fear. So that's what the pain looks like at that level. Then trauma recovery. I mentioned those lovely 6 distressing emotions. I call them the big 6. The pain at that level is what is called continuing distress. So you would be stuck in one or more of the distressing emotions. Um, and then maturity. Um, what that looks like is immaturity, of course, the opposite. Um, it looks like reactivity,
Mhm.
difficulty coming up with what is it like me to do? How do I act in distress? I've maybe got a few choices. If I grew up in a home that dad was angry and broke up all the furniture when he got explosive, um, and I learned to do the same, it gets costly replacing furniture, and plus I scare my family. That's not a very good, satisfying choice. It does not bring me joy when I do act like that. That's a
Mhm.
description of reactivity. So that's what that pain looks like. And then at the coherent identity level, um, that looks like the desynchronized right and left hemisphere. You can't both know and name your experience well. It looks like internal conflict. If you are, if you suffer with dissociative identity disorder, which is a very common response to very complex trauma and early life events that are traumatic, you do not have a coherent identity. It's all split up.
Yeah.
And that's a coping strategy for terrible things that happened that shouldn't have happened to you. So, and then also faulty conclusions, naming the situation incorrectly. Um,
Mm.
I have an example of that. I worked with a gal. Forgive me if I've shared this one with you before, but um, I worked with a gal a long time ago, and she was kind of smelling the air around me that day she came in, and we were working on this, and she said, "Did you have somebody in here that was wearing Spice cologne before me?" I said, "No." "Are you wearing Old Spice cologne?" "No, I don't wear Old Spice cologne. That's a man's cologne." So we sat down and started praying, and lo and behold, she had begun to remember that her perpetrator was wearing Old Spice cologne when this happened to her. And the sensory experiences that come back as you're beginning to recall traumatic memories as it becomes conscious um, can be very, very powerful. And the example of a desynchronized right and left hemisphere, the left hemisphere is responsible for naming things. And what she was doing was naming it incorrectly. She was attributing the current environment, she's attributing the smell to the current environment when it wasn't. It was about the
Mhm.
past. And so the brain has trouble naming something chronologically when that memory comes back and it's so powerful. So that's an example. So we're also going to look at how the brain functions in these different regions. And we're going to look at 3 questions concerning that because it's going to matter depending upon the kind of intervention we do as helpers Or even if we're interacting with each other in community, it's a good thing to know, what am I looking at? What does that person in distress need right now? Maybe we can all identify with times when we've had conversations that just go south. And it's like that person can't hear me. Well, what's going on? So those three questions are, is this an area of the brain that is conscious or unconscious? If it's unconscious, it's not going to understand what's going on, like that example I just gave you. If it's below consciousness, the behavior that's going on, they may not be able to understand, well, they have an impact or they have a part in it, particularly if it is an insecure attachment. They're bringing into the relationship all that they know, and it's insecure. And they may not realize, oh, goodness, I'm reacting that way. I'm part of the problem. Sometimes people don't realize it until you say to them, if there's a bunch of failed relationships here, what's the common denominator? And as you begin to help them see behavior and recognize it and it becomes conscious, they can start to do things differently. They can also help inform the person that is working with them, or mate or friend. Gee, I get very, very triggered by this particular situation. And I know this is how I'm going to probably react. So can you help me with this and remind me, that's probably, I'm reacting to my dad right now, not you. So that's an example of it. So that's the first one. The other question we want to ask, another question we want to ask is this a relational or an unrelational part of the brain? And if it's non-relational, then it's not going to be interested in what you have to offer. You may even be part of the problem. So if you've got somebody in terror, you don't want to stand between them and the door. You might get run over. And so particular interventions are important, both calming your voice, not approaching them, gently beginning to ask what might help in this situation. Is there anything you can think of that would make it better? So that you become part of the solution, not part of the problem. They might even be terrified of you in that moment. I've even offered to back up. And that helps. So, the last one we want to ask about is this a verbal or nonverbal part of the brain? Mm-hmm. And so if there are a lot of helpers out there that are dependent upon words, you might be in trouble with the nonverbal areas that are in pain. And interestingly enough, 4 areas of the brain are nonverbal. There's only 1 area that's verbal. So what does that mean then in intervening? Well, that means essentially other parts of the brain will hear your words, but they don't care what is being said. They care how it's being said. And so we'll be practicing skills for synchronization. That's the fancy term for connecting with someone. Okay. So how do you synchronize with someone? It matters a lot depending upon what kind of distress that person is experiencing, whether there's high energy associated with that feeling or low energy. And so if it's high energy, the person who's synchronizing with that person needs to have an alert response, an attentive response. Their energy ought to come up. I'm trying to model that with my body right now, my body movements. And, I'm getting alert here. Facial features need to respond the same way too. Okay. And the 2 emotions that we would see with that is fear and anger. That would increase energy. The other 4 distressing emotions I mentioned, disgust, shame, sadness, hopeless despair, those all decrease energy. And so your synchronization needs to communicate to that part of the brain that doesn't care about what you're saying, cares how you're saying it. Do you get me? Are you connecting? Are you showing me that you feel the same thing I do? And then as that person models that, then they can begin to bring them out of that distress as they calm. So that's an example of synchronization. And I mentioned already how you'd attend to the one who is in terror and is non-relational. Okay. There's only one area that's non-relational, and that's the receiving and giving. That's what I talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Fear. It's a fight, flight, freeze response at that level. Okay. And so the conscious area that I talked about, there's two regions of the brain that are unconscious. And you want to work with those two areas to bring the behavior to a conscious level and look at it. What can we do to strategize about how to handle that? And that's the first two: belonging, again, and the receiving and giving. So the receiving and giving area strikes out on all three: unconscious, non-relational, and non-verbal.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's the person who is may think of you as part of the problem. And so you want to start offering solutions that are gentle and don't get in their way. Offer to be silent, to back up, so on, that whatever they may need to calm down in that kind of terror. So that's kind of an overview. And what we'll be doing at the retreat is practicing some of these what are called right brain skills. Okay, so we'll be learning how to intervene for those areas of pain in the brain that are nonverbal, that are non-relational, that are unconscious. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Anything else you want me to go over or answer better?
No, that's great. And I'm so excited. I just listening to you, it's like, oh, I can't wait. And I really, like I said, I am so excited about this. I've been trained in many different healing modalities through the years, and it's a lot of good tools that I honor, and use. But this has been the first time that it's very practical and understandable how we were created.
Yes.
Uh, and then understanding when we miss those steps in infancy and childhood, um, the only way is to, work through those maturity gaps. And learn those relational skills so that we can actually function in society. Again, you can get healed, but then if you don't have those skills and maturity, you're not able to live the abundant life that I believe, God created for us.
Right.
And so for a lot of survivors, it's like, well, maybe you can get to where you're functional or surviving, but God wants to bring us to this fullness. And I'm believing that is possible for survivors. But it does mean having to face some difficult things, in our community where, we've been looking at the maturity levels a little bit and it can feel like, well, I'm really mature. And that's part of that pseudo maturity
Yeah.
that we've been used to being givers and we can look really mature, but actually we're enabling and we're doing it out of fear. And so it's hard, it's not easy to face, wow, I may be at infant maturity level, or child
Right.
maturity level.
Yeah.
And to face those things that I need to work through. And I think the key too is that this is not something that you can read in a book and go to a conference and just, oh, now I get it. Now I know it. I'm supposed to be a receiver and giver and all of these kinds of things. It can only be learned in community
Exactly.
and walked out.
You make great points there. Yeah. God created us as seekers of joy. That's the one feeling that we will seek out. The other ones we're working on trying to recover from, the distressing ones. But we are creatures of joy, and He created us to be relational, and we get our joy from relationships. That's how He intended.
Mhm.
But of course, sin and dysfunction entered in and created a lot of pain. If if people were part of the problem, they're going to need to be part of the solution. So you make great points there. Absolutely. And that's how the right brain skills work is you do need people. And as I described that synchronization skill, you need people to model how to recover from those emotions. So we'll be practicing that.
That'll be great. Really looking forward to it. And I'll just share just briefly because I'll be sharing as well, and some from our team. I would love to hear Joe all day long, but I also know when I've done this in the past, the Lord, is like, you have things to bring too. And so, and I believe that it will synchronize with what you're sharing as well. In a lot of what God's put on my heart is paradox. And a lot of times we don't understand what is paradox, but it's where these seemingly opposite things are really meant to come together. And there's this tension that comes with that. And so, even just with the right and left side of our brain, our left side is logical, right side is that flow, creativity, intuition, and all of those kinds of things. They are opposites, but yet they're meant to work together in this beautiful way God created us. And so many body systems, the parasympathetic, sympathetic system, our breath, the way our muscles move, all of those are basically a paradox. And then how we see God. God is Jesus, the lion and the lamb, very opposite characteristics, but come together as one. The challenge is in trauma and in, um, a sinful world, the tendency is to go into these polar opposite, areas and extremes. And then even the middle is a counterfeit. So even like the attachment styles, that you'll be sharing on, I'll touch on it a little bit. The disorganized, or not the disorganized, the avoidant versus anxious are, get away from me, or I need you, I need you, I need you. And the disorganized is a combination of the two, which is a counterfeit.
Yep.
And so we get to go, wow, I need to see these and this, and then see how God truly ordained it is, there is closeness that we need, and sometimes we need time away, and that can function beautifully, the way the Lord designed. And so we'll be looking at different things like this, time and space, because, in the general population, but particularly survivors, you have the rigid on time, I have to be on time or I die. And you have the chaos over here where I can never be on time. And, learning what does it look like to flow in those things. And I believe that part of learning that is these relational skills and attachment and maturity, growth and development. They all are part of that.
Mhm.
um, you've got your OCD, I can't do anything unless everything is perfect in my environment. And you have over here the hoarder, chaos, all of that. Um, the one who is, OCD and the one who's on time can look good, look better, but both of these are just as dysfunctional and come from the same root of fear and control and a bunch of other things. But we can learn this beautiful place in God to flow. And I believe that's part of where we all want to be. There's some shifting here and there, but it's not these wild swings. And so we'll be just kind of looking in the context of what Joe was sharing, also some practical things in time and space, our relationship with God and with each other, how we function and flow in the area of paradox. And so I'm really excited. I'm working on writing a book on paradox, and we'll be developing some coursework on that hopefully this year. You never know how things go. There's so much in life that I'm excited about. Sometimes it's hard to um, work through all of them, but I'm excited and hopeful. So look forward to sharing some of that at the retreat. So
Sounds great. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah. I don't know if you wanted to say anything about the those who are viewing online. It's not going to be the same experientially for them, and I don't know how that might work out with some of the exercises we're going to be doing, the right brain exercises.
yeah, that's a really good point. So I want to encourage as many as possible to come in person. Um, we have a limited amount of space, but we do have room currently, and that is going to be the ideal. And I'll let you share in just a moment about what that looks like. I know that a lot of our community is in other countries, or, there's just not possible to, be able to attend in person. And so Zoom is the only option. And so we're going to work as best we can to try to, have some of these interaction exercises that you can do on Zoom as well. But it's just not the same. And so I don't know if you want to share just a little bit about what that might look like.
Yeah. The skill of synchronizing that we'll be practicing with those big six emotions. We're going to do what is called learning how to tell a good 4+ story. No, without getting into too much detail, 4+ basically, there are four distinct regions in the brain. We label it sloppily level 5 because it's actually the prefrontal cortex that the right and left hemisphere are working together. So they had called it 4+. I'm
Mhm.
sure they still are. But anyway, um, that's what and I learned the term 4+ story. What that means basically is you're telling a story about one of these emotions that involves one of these emotions. So it would be a life event. It's a brief discussion or sharing with maybe one other person or two, uh, usually at the most. And you're sitting fairly close together so that the eye contact is good because the eye contact is what's really important. Your right brain to right brain communication is what's going to pick up the energy, the facial features, the body movements, and so on that communicate to those nonverbal parts of the brain that you understand what I'm feeling. And your energy should match as you're telling your story, and the listeners are listening. That energy should match them. The facial features should match them. By the end of the storytelling, those who are listening should be able to say, well, I felt that fear when you did such and such. And you took me right into that experience. And so, as in a good 4+ story, as you are hitting the emotions and you're telling the story enough that the person is brought into that emotional experience with you, then you begin to calm down and you start telling them, okay, but this is what I did. This is what it was like me to do in this situation. And so you're helping that person recover
Mhm.
as you're telling that story. So it's a little more difficult if you're online
Mhm.
to really pick up all of that you would in the actual environment. When you're sitting close to someone, your blood pressure even will, and your heart rate will synchronize with that person if you're a good synchronizer. And your right brain to right brain communication occurs 6 cycles per second. And so you cannot fake a response. Someone will pick up, and you might relate to this an experience of, someone saying something, but feel like they don't mean it.
Mhm.
And you're picking up from your um, nonverbal areas of your brain what they're saying
Yeah.
and how they're saying it, not so much what they're saying, but how they're saying it that doesn't match what they're hearing.
Mhm.
So that's an example of that. So if you are online, you're not going to pick up some of those nuances. You can somewhat because you've got the visual and you can see the facial expressions. Uh, but it really does make a difference if you're able to do that there in
Mhm.
person. So I do encourage those who can attend to attend.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Joe. And just to let people know, we've structured things with a payment plan. The cost in person includes lunches and dinners. So I believe it's a really great deal. And part of what we do is um, eating together again is that place where we have this relational building and cooking and cleaning together. It's part of the experience of being together. Sometimes I say with some of these retreats, the best conversations, may not be, in the teaching portion, but in that, breaking bread fellowship, in doing dishes together, those types of things where we're learning actually that giving and receiving. A lot of retreats or conferences, it's this fire hose, and you're just, you know, but we want to model as much as we can an interaction between what I call the true family, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and with one another, so that the information is actually going deep instead of just a bunch of head knowledge that you come away going, wow, there was all this stuff, but in a few days, I don't remember anything that was said, you know.
Exactly.
Um,
Actually, what the brain scientists have learned is that we learn better through right brain experiences and storytelling. Um, and I believe that is why Jesus taught in parables so that it would stick. Here are
yes,
examples. Yeah.
yes. So anyway, anything more that you want to share, Joe, for the upcoming retreat?
I think we covered pretty much, the concepts that we want to really share about what we'll be doing.
Yes.
So I can't
All
think of
right.
anything else right now.
Well, thank you so much. So appreciate you being on today. And just want to encourage those of you who are listening that I believe in this model. It's shifting and changing my life and my community. And just want to encourage you, if this interests you, if you feel led or drawn, um, sign up in person if you can. If not, Zoom is better than nothing at all. And you'll be getting a taste of some of the stuff that we do in transformations and in our community. And so you can do that on our website, transformations.community. Sign up for our retreat and encourage you to pass this along to others, that this would be encouraging to them, that there is hope for abundant life. So I just bless you today. Please like, subscribe, and pass this along. And we'll see you next time on Testimony Mount.
Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Yes.